2 weeks before my wedding, my fiancé disappeared with every dollar we had saved, and I drove 6 hours to a house I hadn't been inside in 11 years, convinced I was completely alone. I had no idea someone was already there waiting. I need to back up, because the way it ended doesn't make sense without knowing how it started. My fiancé, I'll call him Marcus, was the kind of man who made you feel chosen. Not loved, exactly, chosen. Like you had passed some invisible test that most women failed, and you should be grateful every day that you did. I didn't understand the difference when I was 26 and he was buying me dinner at restaurants I couldn't afford on my own. By the time I understood the difference, I was 29, my name was on a lease I couldn't break, and we were 8 months away from a wedding that had somehow become entirely his vision and entirely my responsibility. I'm a middle school art teacher. I make enough to live comfortably by myself, not enough to live the way Marcus believed we should live together. He was a project manager for a commercial real estate firm, which sounds more stable than it was. He moved between contracts. He had stretches of very good months and stretches where he was between things, as he always put it. And during those between things stretches, our joint savings account quietly absorbed the difference. I told myself this was partnership. I told myself this was what you did when you built a life with someone. My mother had worked double shifts while my father finished his master's degree, and they'd been married 31 years. I understood the long game. What I didn't understand was that the long game only works when both people are playing it. The first real warning sign I can name, the first one I can't explain away, even now, was about a year before the wedding. I came home from a staff development day to find 3 of Marcus's college friends in our living room, bags at their feet, under the clear impression they were staying for a week. Marcus hadn't mentioned it. When I pulled him into the kitchen and asked, quietly, he looked at me with this particular expression. He had not angry, not apologetic, just patient, the way you're patient with someone who is being slightly unreasonable, and said, I didn't think it needed to be a whole conversation, Maya. That was the expression I should have learned to recognize. I didn't. Or maybe I did recognize it and told myself it meant something other than what it meant. We got engaged the following spring. His mother had planned an engagement party before he even showed me the ring, which I found out the same way I found out about the college friends. He told me about the ring during dinner. He told me about the party in the car home, after I'd said yes, when the conversation shifted naturally to next steps. 40 people, 2 weeks away, venue already booked. He'd put a deposit on it, he said, non-refundable. I smiled and said it sounded wonderful. I was so tired of my own silence by then that I could barely hear it anymore. The wedding planning became a second job. Marcus had opinions about everything and availability for nothing. He wanted the venue, the photographer, the florist, the caterer, the rehearsal dinner location, all chosen, all contracted, all coordinated, and he wanted me to do it, and he wanted to be consulted on every decision, and he wanted to be consulted quickly. And if I made a choice without him, he was disappointed, and if I waited for him to respond, he was irritated that things weren't moving faster. I started waking up at 5 in the morning just to have 2 hours of quiet before the day demanded anything from me. His sister, I'll call her Diane, was a constant presence throughout all of this. Diane was 4 years older than Marcus, divorced once, and had strong opinions about what Marcus deserved. She'd never particularly warmed to me, but during the engagement she moved from cool to something sharper. She started texting him constantly. She had notes on every vendor I selected. She would show up at our apartment on Sunday afternoons, and the two of them would sit at the kitchen table talking in low voices that stopped when I walked in. Once, I asked Marcus what they talked about. He said, "Nothing you need to worry about." And I believed him because I was so depleted from worrying about everything else that I actively wanted something to be off my list. The week before the wedding was the worst week I'd had in years. The florist had a supplier issue. One of Marcus's groomsmen had a family emergency and couldn't come, which meant reseating an entire table. My maid of honor, my closest friend from college, Claire flew in and immediately noticed what I had apparently stopped noticing. We were sitting on the bathroom floor at 11 at night, the way we used to sit on dorm room floors, and she looked at me carefully and said, "When did you last sleep more than 5 hours?" I thought about it. I genuinely had to think about it. "I don't know," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you happy?" I said yes. I said it automatically, the way I'd been saying it for months. Then I heard myself say it, and something in my chest went still and hollow, and I didn't say anything else, and Claire didn't push. Marcus left on a Tuesday. I didn't know he was leaving. He told me he had a work call in the morning and would be working from home, and when I came back from school at 3:30, the apartment was too quiet in a specific way, not the quiet of someone focused in another room, but the quiet of a place where the air had already settled back into itself. His closet was emptied, not packed, quickly emptied, carefully emptied, hangers neat, nothing left behind that he wanted. His toiletries were gone, his laptop, his external hard drives, the box he kept in the back of the closet that I'd never opened and never asked about. I stood in the middle of the bedroom for a long time. Then I checked my phone. Nothing from him. I checked my email. Nothing. I called him. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and his voicemail greeting was already changed to the default automated message, which meant he'd changed it before he left or very shortly after, and somehow that detail was what made my knees stop working correctly. I sat on the edge of the bed and put the phone down and looked at the wall. I checked our joint account 40 minutes later, when I had collected myself enough to think practically. It had been emptied. Not drained over time, emptied in 2 transactions. 3 days earlier, while I was at school giving a unit test on perspective drawing to 30 12-year-olds. I called Claire. She was on the next flight. I called the wedding venue. They were very sorry, but the deposit was non-refundable. I called Marcus 3 more times over the next 2 days. The calls went straight to voicemail by then. On the 3rd day, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize that said only, "It wasn't working. I'm sorry. Please don't contact me." I showed it to Claire. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I thought about the apartment lease, which had 11 months left and both our names on it. I thought about the vendors who still needed final payments. I thought about the wedding guests who had already booked travel. I thought about the rehearsal dinner reservation, the cake deposit, the alterations on my dress that had been finished last week and were ready for pickup. "I want to go somewhere I don't have to explain myself," I said. My grandmother's house had been sitting empty for 3 years, since she passed. It was on the coast of Maine, 40 minutes from the nearest town of any size, a gray shingled house on a 1/4 acre, with a view of the water that I'd been looking at in my memory for 11 years like a photograph I couldn't throw away. My parents had been meaning to sell it and couldn't agree on when. My uncle wanted to use it as a summer rental and hadn't gotten around to the renovations. Everyone had a plan for the house and nobody had done anything, and so it sat there, mine in the sense that I loved it and in no legal sense whatsoever. I called my mother. I explained the bare minimum. Marcus was gone. I needed somewhere to be. Could I use the house? She didn't ask questions. She said yes. She said she would call the utility company herself. I packed 2 bags and a box of art supplies, and I drove. I arrived at 11:30 at night. The house was dark, and the driveway was overgrown. And when I pushed the front door open, the smell was closed up and faintly damp. That particular smell of a house that has been sleeping. I turned on every light on the ground floor and stood in my grandmother's kitchen and allowed myself for the first time since Tuesday to cry. I cried for a long time. Then I washed my face at the kitchen sink and made a list of things I needed from the grocery store and went to bed on the couch because the bedroom mattress needed airing. In the morning, there was a truck in the driveway. I saw it from the kitchen window while I was making coffee, a white pickup with a ladder rack and a magnetic sign on the door that I couldn't read from that angle. I opened the front door, and a man was walking across the driveway toward the house with a clipboard. He stopped when he saw me. I stopped when I saw him. He was somewhere around 30, with dark hair and the kind of face that showed weather, and he looked as surprised as I felt. He glanced at the clipboard, then at the house, then at me. "I'm looking for the Calloway property," he said. "This is it," I said. He looked at the clipboard again. "I have a work order from he checked it, Richard Calloway, for roof inspection and gutter repair. I'm Owen. Hendricks Construction. My Uncle Richard." Who had plans? I had not known the plans had progressed to the stage of actual scheduled contractors. I stood there in my grandmother's doorway in yesterday's clothes with a coffee cup and said, "He didn't mention you were coming." Owen looked at me. "He didn't mention anyone was here." We looked at each other. "I'm Maya," I said. "Richard's niece. I'm staying here for a while. I can come back," he said. He wasn't saying it to be polite. He was genuinely offering. "No," I said, because the roof probably needed inspection, and I wasn't going to let my own chaos derail a work order that had been scheduled before I existed in this situation. "It's fine. Do what you need to do. I'll stay out of your way." He nodded, and that was the first conversation we had. He was there 3 days that first week. He worked quietly and methodically, and when he needed to tell me something, the gutters on the north side needed full replacement. There was a soft spot on the roof over the back addition. Nothing urgent, but worth addressing. He came to the door and said it plainly, without preamble, and waited for me to respond, and went back to work. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't ask why I looked like I hadn't slept. He didn't make conversation that wasn't necessary. I found it, strangely, the most comfortable I'd felt in months. On the third day, I brought him coffee without asking. He accepted it without making a thing of it. We stood on the porch for 7 minutes while he drank it, and I looked at the water, and neither of us said much of anything. And when he finished, he thanked me and went back up the ladder. I went inside and cried again, but differently this time. Diane found me on a Thursday, 2 weeks after I'd arrived. I was in the backyard pulling weeds from the garden bed. My grandmother had loved it, had gone completely wild, but the bones were still there. And I heard a car in the driveway and stood up, and there was Diane in her gray SUV, getting out in a wool coat that was too formal for a coastal Maine afternoon. My stomach went cold. She walked toward me with the expression she'd always had around me, that particular combination of appraisal and conclusion that made me feel like a decision that had already been made. She stopped a few feet away and looked at the house and then at me. "You're harder to find than I expected," she said. "I wasn't hiding," I said, which was mostly true. "Marcus didn't take anything that wasn't his," she said. No preamble, no asking how I was. The money in that account was from his contract last spring. He had a right to it. My hands were still dirty from the garden. I became very aware of this. "That account had my paychecks in it for 16 months, I said. She looked at me the way Marcus used to look at me when I was being slightly unreasonable. The family resemblance was so strong in that moment that it took my breath away. "He was going to talk to you," she said. "He just couldn't do it in person. That's not a character flaw. That's just how he is." "He left 2 weeks before our wedding," I said. "He took the money. He changed his number." "He was unhappy," she said, as if this were a complete and sufficient explanation. I looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you here, Diane?" She reached into her coat pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. "There are some items at the apartment that are his. He wants them shipped." He gave me a list. I looked at the list. There were 11 items on it. I recognized 9 of them as things I had bought or that had been gifts to me. "No," I said. She blinked. It was apparently not the answer she was prepared for. "Those aren't his," I said. "And even the ones that might arguably be his, no. He can contact me through an attorney." "He doesn't want this to get legal," she said. "Then he should have thought about that before he emptied our joint account," I said. She left. I stood in the garden for a while after her SUV disappeared down the road. And then I went inside and called a lawyer, a family law attorney my mother had found for me. And I told her about the account and the items on the list. And she told me what my options were, and I wrote everything down in the notebook I'd started keeping, and then I went back outside because the garden wasn't going to clear itself. Owen's truck was back the next morning, the soft spot over the back addition. "Everything okay?" he asked, which was more than he usually asked. "My fiancé's sister showed up yesterday," I said. I don't know why I told him. Maybe because he was just there and present and not performing concern. He was quiet for a moment. The one who left? I had mentioned Marcus once briefly when Owen had asked about the lease situation for a contractor permit question. I hadn't said much. "Yes," I said. "She drive all the way out here?" "Yes." He processed this. What did she want? To tell me the money he took was actually his, and to give me a list of items he wants shipped. Owen looked at me steadily. "You're not going to send them." It wasn't a question. "No," I said. He nodded. He went and got his tools. Later, when he came to find me to show me the repair on the addition, he paused at the door of the living room, where I'd been working on the first painting I'd done in 2 years, nothing significant, just the water view from the back window, working out whether my hands still knew what to do. He looked at it for a moment. He didn't say anything complimentary in a reflexive way. He said, "The light in that top left corner, is that what it actually looks like in the morning?" "Yes," I said, "about 7:15. He looked at it again. "You've got it right," he said, and went back down the hall. I put the brush down and looked at the canvas for a long time after he was gone. Marcus called in the 6th week. I was sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table with a cup of tea and a stack of bills I was sorting through when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I nearly didn't answer. Something made me. "Maya." His voice, completely unchanged, warm and familiar, and immediately disorienting. I didn't say anything. "I know you're probably angry," he said. "I understand that. But I think we need to talk, because there are things I want to say to you and I made a mistake. In how I handled things." I noticed that he did not say he had made a mistake in the things themselves, only in the handling. "You emptied our savings account," I said. "That money was it's complicated, Maya. We can talk about the money. I want to talk about us." "There isn't an us," I said. "I know you're saying that," he said gently, "the way you talk to someone who is being slightly unreasonable. But I think if we could just, I've been thinking a lot. I want to try again. I want to come out there and—" "How do you know where I am?" I asked. A pause. "Diane said you were at your grandmother's place in Maine." So he'd sent Diane first. Of course he had. "Marcus," I said. And I was surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "I have spoken to an attorney. If you'd like to discuss the account, you can do it through her. I'm going to send you her contact information. Please don't call this number again." I hung up before he could say anything else. I sat very still for a minute, then I texted him the attorney's number and blocked him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the version of that moment I'd imagined when I'd imagined it in the abstract, the confrontation where I finally said all the things. It was just a phone call, and then it was over, and I made a second cup of tea and finished sorting the bills. Claire visited in the 7th week. She drove up on a Friday night, and we sat on the porch with blankets and wine, and I told her everything that had happened, which took a while. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always loved most about her. When I finished, she said, "You sound different." "Different how?" She thought about it. "Quieter," she said. "But like quiet on purpose. Not quiet because you're holding something." I thought about that. "The house helps," I said. "This specific place." She looked out at the water. "Tell me about the contractor." I felt heat in my face, which surprised me. "I haven't. There's nothing." "Maya." She looked at me. "You mentioned him 4 times in the last 20 minutes. You don't mention anyone 4 times. I looked at the water. "He's just easy to be around," I said. "He doesn't want anything from me. Has he asked you anything? About yourself? I thought about the painting. The light in that top left corner, is that what it actually looks like in the morning? He asked about my painting, I said. Claire smiled into her wine glass. It's not, I started. I know, she said. It doesn't have to be anything, but it's something. The fact that you feel like a person around him is something. He finished the main repairs in the 8th week. He came to the door on a Wednesday morning with the final paperwork and went over it with me, what had been done, what he recommended monitoring, who to call if the north gutter caused problems again before the full replacement could be budgeted. He was thorough. He answered every question. He didn't rush. When we were done, he put the papers back in the folder and held it out to me, and I took it, and we were standing in my grandmother's front hallway, and I was looking at him properly for the first time in 8 weeks, without the context of work orders and ladders and repair terminology. I'm glad you were here when I needed someone who didn't want anything, I said. I hadn't planned to say it. He looked at me carefully. I'm glad you brought coffee the first week, he said. I almost came back another day because I thought I was intruding. I'm glad you didn't, I said. He nodded. He started toward the door. Stopped. There's a farmer's market in town Saturday mornings, he said, without turning around. If you wanted company, it's easier than going alone the first few times. I looked at his back. You go to the farmer's market? He did turn around then, and he was almost smiling, which was the most I'd seen from him in 8 weeks. My mother sells jam there. I'm obligated. But the oysters are actually worth it. I was quiet for a moment. Saturday, I said. 8 o'clock, he said. He left. I stood in the hallway holding the folder of repair documents and looked at the front door for a while. Then I went back to my painting. The legal situation with Marcus resolved 6 weeks after that, without drama. The attorney negotiated a settlement. It wasn't everything I'd put into that account, but it was fair, and it was over, and when the last paperwork was signed, I sat in my car in the parking lot of the attorney's office and felt something I hadn't expected. Not relief, exactly, but lightness. The specific lightness of putting down a weight you'd been carrying so long, you'd stopped registering it as weight. I called my mother on the way home. It's done, I said. She exhaled. How are you feeling? I drove for a while, watching the road unspool ahead of me, the trees on either side holding their color against an October sky. I feel like myself, I said. I actually don't know how long it's been since I could say that. She was quiet in the way my mother gets when she's trying not to cry. Come home for Thanksgiving, she said. Bring whoever you want. I smiled. I'll ask him, I said. My mother made a sound that was not quite a question and very much a question, and I said, I'll tell you everything at Thanksgiving. And she said, Maya Ann Calloway, you will tell me before Thanksgiving. And I laughed, actually laughed. The kind that comes from your whole chest for what felt like the first time in a year. The house isn't mine legally. That conversation is still ongoing in my family, and it will probably be ongoing for another year at least. But I've been teaching an art class Friday afternoons at the community center in town, and the school district 2 towns over reached out in September about a long-term substitute position. I have a lease on a small place 10 minutes from the water. I have a garden that is slowly becoming less wild. I have a painting hanging in the living room of a 7:15 morning light on the coast of Maine that someone once told me I'd gotten exactly right. I think about the version of myself who stood in that bedroom staring at empty hangers and couldn't make her knees work properly. I don't feel sorry for her. She was doing what she knew how to do, which was hold things together and tell herself that was the same as being held. It took someone taking everything and walking away for me to find out how much I could actually carry alone, and how much lighter everything becomes when you stop carrying the wrong things. The farmer's market is on Saturday. I'm making a list.